Poštovani putnici, dobrodošli na naš redovan let za Chicago. Let za Chicago, let za Chicago, let za Chicago.
I am from Bosnia, take me to America. I really want to see Statue of Liberty. I can no longer wait, take me to United States. Take me to Golden Gate, I will assimilate.
Hello and welcome to the Midwest, the region in the United States generally known for Chicago, and well, mostly Chicago. And today we will be going to Chicago, and some lesser known cities that no one really cares about. Anyways, to even start your journey to the United States, you generally first gotta get to the United States. And there are two ways of doing so. Number one, be born in the country. If you were born here, well, my condolences. Or number two, get a visa to get to the United States. In reality, you would be way better off sawing off your private parts with a rusty wood saw, as it would be way less painful and tedious. Luckily, I was born here, so I'm able to flex on all of you peasants and just hop the border like it's nothing. Upon getting your papers all in order, you'll probably arrive at one of these 5 states: Georgia, California, Illinois, Texas, or Colorado. Naturally, me being Serbian, there is only one place I would arrive at, and that is Chicago, as Chicago is informally known as a Serbian containment zone, where all of those Balkan spastics that fought for the Chetniks were forced to go to, as there were no way in hell they would go back to communist Yugoslavia. Aj dođi pička ti materina ako smeš, a? Šta je bilo pičke? Upon arriving in Chicago, you will soon be hit with the realization that there isn't much to do here, and everything is extremely expensive, and you will beg God to take you back to the Eastern European shithole you call home.
Dom.
But nonetheless, there are things to do, such as going to the lake. Wow. Paying $9 for a hot dog. Trying not to get shot in a drive-by shooting. That last one is no joke. There have been more people that died from a shooting in Chicago than that have died in the war in Iraq, which has coined the city its nickname, Chirac. You can also look at the Bean, which is pretty cool. However, you can always walk through the city center, aka downtown, and enjoy the urban feel. When walking through Chicago, it's like walking through a jungle of skyscrapers. Everywhere you look, you're surrounded by them, most of which were built throughout the 20th century. However, some of the oldest buildings date all the way back to the 1880s. For any average European, that's not really impressive. However, Chicago is generally known for being a prime example of American architecture throughout history, and you can find all sorts of examples here ranging from all sorts of decades, and that really does show when walking down the streets of the city. One of my favorite buildings was definitely the Tribune Tower, which is 140 meters tall. Built in the 1920s, it was originally used as an HQ for the Chicago Tribune, which was a newspaper media company. Later on, CNN inhabited the building. However, today the Tribune Tower is being converted into a residential building, with most of the offices being turned into condominiums. Near it, you can also find the Chicago Riverwalk, where people go out to have expensive lunches at expensive restaurants and take aesthetic pictures by the river, with all of the buildings in the background. Pretty alright place. Similar to it, there's also the Navy Pier, which is basically a pedestrian zone by the lake, and apparently is one of the most visited places in the Midwest, with around 2 million visitors annually. Why? I don't know. It's just a pedestrian zone with overpriced boat rides, which go from $50 and above. There's also a Ferris wheel, but there's one of those in almost every city. I don't know, man, you can take a walk around here and pay for some overpriced food. That's about it. Other than that, you can go to the Chicago Theater, which is, well, a theater. It's known for its Broadway performances, and that's pretty much Chicago in a nutshell. The rest you can see in the city are basically museums and galleries, and you know how we feel about those on this channel. Oh no. And I mean, that's fine, Chicago isn't that old of a city, only being founded in 1837. Meanwhile, in Europe, Asia and Africa, you can find backyard gates older than that. And I mean, there were basically only two major events that shaped Chicago's history. Number one, the Great Chicago Fire, where a fire thanos-snapped 1/3 of the city, killing 300 people and leaving 100,000 people homeless because some IQ 200 genius didn't know how to turn off a lamp after using it. And number two, the Prohibition. Back in the 1920s, America went through a genius idea of banning all drinking alcohol throughout the country because some women didn't like that their men were coming home drunk and beating them. So instead of blaming it on their dysfunctional relationship and bad marriage, or the depressing state of 1920s capitalism, they decided to blame it on the alcohol. So they did. And all alcohol was banned so hard that it was written in the Constitution of the United States that no alcohol will be sold on its soil. And that fixed the problem so well that the mob rose to prominence and sold even more liquor than when it was legal, and in the meantime managed to kill several thousand people in gang-related skirmishes mostly led by Al Capone. Thank God nothing of that caliber ever happened again in the United States. War on drugs! Moving on from Chicago, we head on north to the state 99% of Europeans have never heard of before up until now, known as Wisconsin, where we head on to Chicago's appendix, known as the city of Milwaukee. Now, for most people visiting the states, Milwaukee is that one place they've heard of come up once when someone was discussing something about the US in general, and then never have the city be brought up again. And that's for a good reason. There isn't anything much here. Unlike Chicago, which at least has a jungle of skyscrapers, Milwaukee is basically your generic city in the US. It has a small downtown through which the Milwaukee River flows through. There you have mostly office buildings and some buildings from the early 20th century that used to be storage houses. There's also the lakefront, which I guess is pretty nice, way more chill than the one in Chicago. There you can find the Museum of Art, which is the building that more or less defines the city's skyline. There's a pier there as well, that's mostly for recreational use. In the city center you can also find the historic Third Ward, where you can find most of the previously mentioned historic buildings. There's one in the Baroque architecture style, which I really like. Near it is the Milwaukee Public Market, which is basically an overpriced food market with a bunch of restaurants and shops that sell cheese and overpriced produce. Why do they sell cheese? Well, I'm glad you asked, noble viewer. That's because Wisconsin is the country's epicenter of cheese production. Over 25% of all cheese produced in the United States comes from this state, with a smaller population than Serbia, 5 million people. However, most Europeans scoff at American cheese due to it having a weird color and them liking to gatekeep. But I'll have you know that the orange color occurring in cheddar cheese is not actually natural. Rather, the color is added. If there was no color added, the cheese would look like any other piece of fermented milk everyone likes to put on pizza. The reason Americans dye their cheese is because before farmers used to feed their cattle with regular food you feed your cattle with, such as corn and whatever else, farmers used to feed them with annatto seeds, which would stain the cheese orange. Many Americans associated the color with the product. So when the farmers moved on to feeding cattle regular shit cattle eats, many were displeased that the cheese lost its color. So they started coloring the cheese with the seed again. The more you know. Other than that, Milwaukee, like most American cities, is made up of suburbs and other smaller towns, quotation marks, like Bayview. Now, Bayview is kind of your typical sub-area of an American city. It's filled with hipsters and artisan shops. It's got a couple of churches in the area, and that's about it. And there are several areas like that all over Milwaukee. Note that if you are a pedestrian and usually go to wherever you want to go by foot or public transportation, that's not a thing in America. So you're gonna have to rent a car, or mooch off of someone that already has one. As the US was built by the motor industry, and public transport is horrible and everything is extremely far apart, so you can forget on walking. Gotta love late stage capitalism. Next up, we go into Iowa and explore smaller towns of the Midwest and the Mississippi. So make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And tell me, have you ever been to Chicago? Do you plan on going? Let me know in the comment section down below. My name is Nick and you've watched Living Ironically in Europe.
Jednog grba Kamila odmah se pomama.